coming out called The New Poetics on Late Feet Press in the spring, and one thing that they do, so they're an amazing press. One thing that they do is they publish 4 books a year, and at the beginning of the year, they do a different kind of handmade book each year that is aesthetic statements from all the writers, and they work with artists to do the cover art and stuff like that. So each writer writes their own aesthetic statement, and each artist as well. So I'm going to read from that. It's called The Old Poetics is the aesthetic statement, because the book is called The New Poetics. And you got to be thorough. So yeah, here we go. Douglas Steiger, the John French Professor of Economics in the Department of Economics at Dartmouth College, discredits the Old Poetics implicitly rather than explicitly, and discloses its false grounding and hence its irrelevance. Arguing against a contemporary fixation on one problem of the Old Poetics, its capacity to convey a singular attention, he suggests visiting the other areas of contention around the Old Poetics by translating its concepts into the more familiar terminology of the Old Poetics. He says, there is an enuresis, italics mine, in Mother Courage, and here the shadow of the Old Poetics lies more heavily upon him, and then he passes into a consideration of the rules and limitations of poetry, but a speculation overflows the limits of the Old Poetics, and yet by proclaiming that the new poetry is a new way of feeling and living. The idea of an identity eventually formed around the principle of travel, which was, after all, the underlying idea of the Old Poetics of exile, redeeming one thing by mistaking it for another. However, through the means of the Old Poetics, with its combinations of actions and its characters envisioning ideas, an identity formed around the principle of travel, which was, after all, the underlying idea of the Old Poetics of exile. To replace the Old Poetics, the Ars Poetica of Horace, and set aside the Old Poetics of song, can be shown that the New Poetics involves developing the aim and imprint of a characteristic voice, just as there had been a strong flavor of Ciceronian rhetoric in Horace's views on poetry. The Old Poetics lasted because it could be developed in significant ways to accommodate the valuable insights provided by narrative. We must now admit the cause of our dispute. You see, the Old Poetics' penchant for representing peasants should be blamed, but this speculation overflows the limits of the Old Poetics, proclaiming that the new poetry was also a new way of feeling and living. Brecht and Wahl developed a new poetics of dramatic form, and street protests demonstrated that the Old Poetics of Aristotelian dramatic action were still alive. The shift of interest to the individual taste of the reader strengthened the conviction that translating concepts into the familiar terminology of the Old Poetics, as in the Old Poetics is understood by literary genres as certain rules of craftsmanship, which the poet follows, the patterns of form and structures within which we at last come to the cause of the dispute. You see, the Old Poetics is to be blamed. It does not mind the representation of peasants, but this overflows the limits of the Old Poetics, proclaiming that the new poetry is also a new way of feeling and living. The union of poetry and prose is a constant, which is a formally and highly accomplished witness of traditional poetics, but which in every sentence and line rejects the philosophy of the Old Poetics. However, with the eruption of otherness into literature and the dominant social order, the Old Poetics of vision loses ground to a theory of perception that posits a logical starting point, and one which isn't so easy to exploit. Here, the shadow of the Old Poetics lies heavily upon us as we move from the presuppositions of the Old Poetics to the consideration of the rules and limitations of poetry, to the question of, do you want to write and want to know how it's done? To plead that the Old Poetics has lasted 1,500 years and ours 30 doesn't help much. Pauline Yu has overemphasized the degree to which poets rejected the principles on which the Old Poetics and classics were based. We may note that contemporary linguistics gives this operation a name borrowed from the Old Poetics, embedding or modifying an older mode of composition by translating into central concepts into the more familiar terminology of the Old Poetics. Employing Heideggerian terminology, one can describe this altered perspective as it occurs in 4 quartets, as Eliot's acknowledged in the Old Poetics of the Enlightenment having been instrumental in the destruction of the Old Poetics and in creating a host of new generic hybrids in literature. The Old Poetics assigns the epigram to the lyric category. There are, of course, lyric epigrams. For instance, the delicate landscape depictions of the New World gave vitality to the Old Poetics, just as the Old Poetics gave strength to the proclamation of a new faith. The Old Poetics lasted because it could be developed in significant ways to accommodate the valuable insights provided by narrative. But we must not mistake one art for another and remain trapped in the Old Poetics with its combinations of characters envisioning actions on an epic scale. The Old Poetics is particularly bitter against the poet who experiments in the mixing of theatrical devices, the 20th century poet who practiced mistaking one art for another and envisioning great ends. One should also note Bakhtin's claims that the Old Poetics, that is, old literary theory, is inadequate to describe the modern novel. This means the Old Poetics of the quintessence of art must be supplanted by the poetics of its aesthetic function, a function that takes on solid form and serves, therefore, at once to designate and to characterize the Old Poetics. I often add, if not to destroy, at least to discredit the Old Poetics. The old poetry itself was blameless, was of course left intact. The Old Poetics is understood by literary genres, posited the poet was to follow certain rules of craftsmanship, empty patterns. Douglas Steiger discredited the Old Poetics implicitly rather than explicitly. He disclosed its false grounding and hence its irrelevance, and also that it would be pointless to seek in the Old Poetics to focus on taste. He said, in giving short shrift to the critics, I often had, if not to destroy, at least to discredit the Old Poetics. The old poetry itself was blameless. The Old Poetics are dead. It's not enough to mean what you mean anymore, etc., etc., lying beneath the arbors of your hunchbacked oak tree, a small cultural light is formed, which is no less exclusive than the normative classicism of the Old Poetics. The only difference in Steiger's approach to the Old Poetics that he reaches by the end of the book is that he believes the Ars Poetica, the Old Poetics, and Latin allegories of cosmic order are not adverse to the representation of peasants. He then goes further to claim that this brings us to the cause of our dispute, and that the Old Poetics is to be blamed. Mistaking one art for another means we are still trapped in the old poetics with its combinations of actions, its characters envisioning the mistake of one art for another. This means we are still trapped in the old poetics with its combinations of actions, its characters envisioning the results of a wealth of research, showing that the confrontation between the new music and the old poetics in antiquity was not aesthetical but ideological. And in fact, the results of the research do show that the confrontation between the new music and the old poetics in antiquity was aesthetical and not ideological. Contrary to the old poetics, I understand that by literary genres, certain basic themes, mutually exclusive and true aesthetic categories. Now we have at last come to the cause of this dispute. We can see that the old poetics to be blamed for it. Does not mind the representation of peasants. Of course, it is easy to see how the resources of the old rhetoric and the old poetics still find uses, even when nothing else seems to have been learned. According to the old poetics of humanism,